Hi there, this is Ryan with ZombieRacks, and today we're going to be installing a hybrid death rail system on this Porsche Cayenne that's already been outfitted with the Wasteland series full rack from our previous installation video. To begin, we're going to want to verify you've received all required components for this install and lay them out. Now, quick note, we are installing these hybrid death rails after we installed that full rack on the Porsche, but you can absolutely install these before a full rack is mounted to a vehicle. For this particular system, we have an odd number of total rack assemblies from front to back. So we're going to be using these switchback rails, followed by intermediate rails, and then radius rails for the ends. Each mounting uses these kick connectors, which are directional for the driver and passenger side of the rack, along with a set of M8 mounting hardware for mounting the kick connector to the rack base. We've used powder-coated kick connectors here to help visually aid assembly against the raw aluminum rack finish. Next will be the HDR side supports and the M6 hardware assemblies used at rack connection points. These are designed to straddle the saddle washers on the rack and attach the hybrid death rails to the existing rack bases. To begin, we're going to want to take our metric Allen keys and 10mm wrench to loosen the installed connector assembly hardware. Once the entire hardware assembly is removed from the rack, you'll take the M6 bolt and flat washer, install them through the two holes on the HDR side support, then install the two saddle washers and slide the assembly back onto the rack. From there, place the two saddle washers on the back side of the rack, followed by the second HDR side support, then flat washer, and finally the flange lock nut. Be sure to keep this assembly loose to aid in installing the hybrid death rails later on. We'll go ahead and repeat these steps on the remaining rack connection points. So now that the HDR side supports have been installed, we can begin mounting the rails themselves. We'll begin with the switchback rail and the two intermediate rails on each side of that switchback rail. Another note here, I messed up and placed that intermediate rail on the left side of the screen backwards so that the diamond cutouts are facing the wrong direction. It will not affect the use of the rail, it just looks a little funny. So it was a long day, we can just make fun of my install together. We'll now take those M6 hardware assemblies and install them through the HDR side supports and rail holes, being sure to keep all hardware assemblies loose to allow adjustment. Repeat that for the remaining locations. Next, we will be installing those radius rails on each rack end, following the same steps as those previously installed rails. Once placed, we can move on to finalizing the hybrid death rail positions. Starting with the centermost rail, position the rail and side supports so that the end of the rail lines up with the end of the intermediate assembly tube in the small cutout of the HDR side support. Once lined up, lightly tighten top and bottom hardware assemblies to hold position, and then move down the rack towards each end. Last steps will involve mounting the kick connectors to each rack end. The hardware that attaches the kick connector to the hybrid death rail includes a small aluminum spacer to offset the kick connector in order to clear the rack base tube. Be sure not to lose this spacer when installing. Starting with a right kick connector, orient the connector onto the mounting channel closest to the rail end. Next, install the bolt with a flat washer from the outside of the rail face, followed by the spacer on the opposite face of the rail, then the kick connector, and finally the flat washer and flange knock nut. You'll then take the M8 mounting hardware assembly and install so that the bolt and washer is as close to the rail as possible. Note that on some installs, this secondary mounting hardware set may not be used in conjunction with existing mounting hardware, so you'll just use that existing mounting hardware in its place. We'll go ahead and repeat those same steps with this left kick connector. Once all hardware is installed, double check all rail alignment, and then go ahead and tighten all hardware to spec, which can be found in your assembly manual. I'll go ahead and do some movie magic here to repeat those same steps on the opposite side. And with that, your hybrid death rail is complete. Check out other installation videos for installing accessories and other rail styles. Cheers!